Nigel Farage has got hot under the collar about the names of school houses. We talk about this in Farage Farrago.
Well, talking about people getting hot under the collar, you interviewed Professor Michael Young this week and got him all excited about powerful knowledge.
Did indeed. And we're also going to talk about the return to school, extra classes, activities, and what will the unions do about it?
And is it all going to happen on the 8th of March? And we're also going to have a little bit of a look at some of the eccentric approaches to building new schools and which, it would appear, often don't work as well as we might want.
Hello and welcome to
yet another edition of
It's Your Time You're Wasting.
Goodness me, it feels like we've been wasting a lot of time this week. The viewers at home, you don't know how much pain we've been through. Maybe you can tell from looking at our faces. Martin, I can tell you've been through all sorts of things by looking at your hair.
My hair, yes, it grows apparently. Hair grows.
Well, yes, and it's looking. I can't tell whether you're a sort of long-haired ruffian or you're sporting some look I might associate with the metropolitan elite. What are you going for?
Oh, it's definitely not metropolitan liberal elite. I shouldn't think. Not in hair. Don't they have far? Well, I've been to North London a few times, and they have far smarter hair than this. I tell you. One thing I'm interested in is dog groomers are open, but you can't get a haircut for love nor money.
Well, you say that. My teenage daughter did this to me in a moment of not paying attention, and it's taken a little bit of getting used to. But I don't know. I'm a bit of a convert. You could, Martin. I mean, obviously, the big choice for you is more. Are you gonna go full tilt, full pelt, or are you going to have it lopped off?
Well, you never know. Perhaps wait till next week. But to tell you the truth, while it's cold, it's quite good having it over the ears.
Okay, well that's good. That's a good tip. I found a hat works there. But viewers at home, get in touch at hello@wastingyourtime.co.uk and let us know what you'd like Martin to do with his hair. and he'll happily do whatever the consensus is.
Certainly, I will consider anything.
Brilliant. And the other thing that I'd like people to fully appreciate about the effort you've gone to this afternoon, Martin, is that in the pocket of your tweed jacket, you're actually sporting a silk handkerchief, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. That's for when I start crying later.
Very nice. So we look forward to those tears. The tears of a clown.
Before bedtime.
Yeah, good. Well, look, Martin, we could go on like this for another 30 seconds at best. But what have we got lined up?
Well, as we said earlier, one of the first things we're going to look at is the Nigel Farage Farrago.
Yeah, old Nige had a right old rant about Churchill and the fact that the people who are wanting to get rid of him are the most liberal people who have ever lived, I think he says.
Yeah, let's have a listen to what he had to say.
A couple of days ago, an email came in via my website. I looked at it. I thought, well, this must be a hoax, surely. It purported to come from Seaford Head School in East Sussex. Sadly, I've now learned that it is true. Let me share the contents of the letter with you. Dear parents, carers, and students, for some time now, the houses of Seaford Head School have been named after famous figures who are supposed to represent the school's core values. However, recently, we have gained increased awareness of the actions and attitudes of some of these people, and their appropriateness as representatives of the houses has been questioned by students. For example, Churchill could be considered to be an important historical figure, could be considered. However, we are now more aware that Churchill was a figure who promoted racism and inequality, unfairly imprisoning and torturing many. And they go on to say that prejudice must not be encouraged within their community, and therefore the name of Churchill is going to be removed from one of the houses at Seaford Head School. Now, this is signed by 2 of the sixth form students. They say they've consulted with the student body. They haven't consulted with the rest of the youngsters at that school. They haven't consulted with the parents, who often in these things don't seem to count for very much. I've no doubt, though, they have been encouraged by some of the teaching staff in this school. I could launch an attack on these 2 students. I could say, don't you idiots realise that if it wasn't for Churchill, Nazi Germany would have dominated Europe. You probably would have grown up speaking German and wouldn't even be able to have free speech and debate and to have your own opinions. But that, I think, wouldn't be fair. We must ask ourselves, why do we have young people who've got these very, very odd, warped views about somebody who actually saved the free world? Somebody who, for his whole career, campaigned against anti-Semitism. And the reason is actually it's not the fault of these youngsters. It is our educational establishment through schools, and it's even worse at universities, who are promoting a hard left Marxist agenda, whether they know it or not. It's all dressed up in terms of racial equality. It's all dressed up to be being nice and tolerant about the world. In fact, behind it is a very deep intolerance, a loathing and a hatred of anybody with a different point of view to you. The Liberals now are, in fact, the most illiberal people that have probably ever lived.
There you go.
Who knew?
He was very. It's good to see schools getting talked about, though, isn't it? I mean, education top of the news agenda, but it's very odd that he said a couple of things he said there. I like the way I could launch an attack on these students and say blah 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 blah, but I won't, because that wouldn't be fair. Call them idiots and things like that. But that won't be fair, so I won't do that. But what do we think? What do we think generally about this? Is he right to be upset about this?
Well, he's welcome to be upset, isn't he? And one of the difficulties is that I can feel broadly sympathetic, but then as soon as the likes of Nigel Farage get involved, obviously you've sort of undermined yourself, haven't you, in terms of having an argument or a position, because he's not the ally you want.
Yeah, I mean, well, he thinks that liberals are more illiberal than anyone who's ever existed. I mean, that must include the Nazis that Churchill saved us from. No. And that's why we're not speaking German or something like that. Perhaps liberals speak German.
It's an extraordinary thing to say, but I think at the heart of it there is a discussion about maybe different meanings of the word liberal and what that has come to mean. That when we think of social liberalism, obviously very different from classical liberalism. What do you think he's getting at there, Martin?
Well, it's the culture war again, isn't it? I mean, it is stirring up the two sides of the culture war. On one side, we have Churchill and the flag. Even Nigel Starmer, what's his name? Keir Starmer was drawn into this with the Union Jack.
Nigel Starmer.
Nigel, yeah, Sir Keir Starmer. But the idea that teachers are all, the educational elite are all Marxists and all this stuff sort of easily puts us into two warring factions. But there's some interesting things here. Seaford House School in East Sussex. This was a student initiative, so student voice that perhaps some people think is a good thing in itself. People talk about authority and whether students should have the power to do this sort of thing. Wrote a letter and obviously campaigned about two houses that they weren't happy with the names of, and that's Churchill House and JK Rowling House.
Was it JK Rowling House or just Rowling House?
I think it's probably Rowling House, but if I say Rowling, I want to give you the full JK about it so you know who I'm talking about.
Big point.
And they objected to Churchill because of his racism and belief in inequality, and JK Rowling on trans issues. Now, they've instead proposed houses named after local landmarks like Beacon House, Tide Mills House, Friston House. And you could argue. I mean, when I was at, I think it was primary school, our houses were named after rivers. And I think this is probably a good way to go for a lot of houses, because you don't get so much perhaps tension around there.
Houses at my school were named after Catholic saints.
Well, did you go to a Catholic school by any chance?
I did.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
I remember them. We had Chad, Anselm, Beckett, and Canelm.
You see, Thomas a Becket, he reached a sticky end, didn't he?
Yeah.
Controversial. There's two things going on here. I think, first of all, I don't really care what houses are called in a school. No. I think that's really up to the school. The interesting thing is about Churchill to some extent, but I'm more interested perhaps in the JK Rowling thing. I mean, because I know schools that have taken her books off the shelves due to student pressure, off the shelves of libraries, etc., and certainly a number of school children are, I don't know if they've got this far, but burning their Harry Potter books or whatever. I made that up, but perhaps it's happened. Why not make it up? But is there much discussion here about JK Rowling and just calling her a transphobe? I don't know if she is, and whether that should be just accepted in a letter home to parents that JK Rowling is written off as a transphobe, despite the fact that she has written and put out there articles saying she is not, and why she is not a transphobe. So I think that this is a bit more difficult to accept, perhaps, but certainly the Churchill thing as well, because Churchill's role in history lessons, in the national picture, if you like, and also in English lessons, perhaps, for his great speeches, are going to start affecting curriculum and all these things about, and say, just write the man off very easily. And that doesn't, neither of those sit well with me.
No, there are different issues here, aren't there? I mean, I like you. I'm a bit taken aback by school wanting to have a Rowling House anyway. It seems perhaps a little bit ephemeral. But Churchill, at least, been around a little bit longer, a little bit more perhaps a pillar of British society. But there's in my neck of the woods, in Bristol, there has been all sorts of debate over the years, which has accelerated more recently over the name of Colston, and obviously he whose statue was dragged into the river, and Colston Girls' School put the fact that this school could be renamed to a vote for students and parents to give their views on. And initially, they decided they'd like to retain the name, and then in the wake of what happened in the summer and all the rest of it, they've decided to do away with the name. I can't remember off the top of my head what they're going to be calling themselves now. And I think after lots and lots of wrangling, Colston Hall is not going to be called Colston Hall. I think they're going to be, I don't know what they're going to be calling that. I remember going to see a Stuart Lee gig in which he constantly referred to it as Colston Hall of Slavery, which I thought was quite nice. We could do that. But I think the historian David Olosogo is kind of interesting on this, where he talks about the fact that when it comes to pulling down statues, it's not so much that he wants to do that, but he does think it's appropriate to put up a plaque that puts these people into a clearer context and makes it more obvious what the problems with celebrating them might be. And I think it's reasonable, for instance, for children to learn about the fact that Churchill was arguably a great wartime leader and won the Nobel Prize and did all sorts of other things, but also had some fairly unpleasant views about Indians, for example, and disabled people. He was certainly not sweetness and light. But you're right, with JK Rowling, it does. I mean, firstly, as I said, what are schools doing naming houses after her in the first place? But secondly, it does seem a little bit unfair that a certain section of society has decided that they don't like her views, and that then gets accepted without debate. And I think it's more interesting, more useful, perhaps, to try and open that up and talk about it and say what the issues are and why some people are upset and why some people are fiercely defensive of the points of view that she's put out there.
Yeah, and historical figures always should be painted warts and all, and also put into their context that, of course, at the time, he was Churchill born in the 19th century,
in Blenheim Palace.
Indeed, and would fought in the Boer War, I think, or something like that. Certainly his views are more of his time, but of a certain class as well, a certain background. Funnily enough, he was a liberal as well for some point as well, but it became a conservative again. But there are elements of him that we would find more difficult nowadays, and at the time people would have argued against. I remember my mother, who remembers Churchill from the war, not liking Churchill at all. She was a good socialist, as her father was, etc., etc., and they hated Churchill vehemently, but thought that he was a good leader in the war, and his rhetoric from the radio really did serve to boost morale and to garner the nation, against the Nazi war.
I think that's a very fair way of keeping him in perspective. He was the man of the hour, perhaps during the Second World War, but apart from that, his political career was pretty controversial in many ways. And the fact that he lost that the landslide defeat after the war to the first Labour government was, I think, by and large, seen by a great swathe of society as a huge triumph. And as you say, like your mother, many people were pleased to see the back of him once the war was over.
And are there any acceptable people that we could name our houses after? I mean, you talk about the saints in the Catholic school, perhaps that, but then people might say, what about female representation?
Well, is an issue.
Is there Joan of Arc house, etc., etc.? So what become the criteria? I think local monuments or local rivers or local landmarks. That sounds to me like a way forward anyway.
Yeah, sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, if we have to name them after anyone, I think maybe Martin Robinson House.
Martin Robinson House, David Didau House. No. We're far too flawed characters. That wouldn't last very long. I can't imagine Nigel Farage getting on.
No, the children would definitely be writing to complain, wouldn't they?
Anyway, talk about sort of controversial characters. Will Knowland is back in the news this week.
Tell us about him again. What was he? What was his?
He's the Eton teacher who was sacked for his patriarchy paradox video, and Eton College has reported Knowland apparently to the Teacher Regulation Authority.
Nice.
It's a very odd little report, this, in the Times. It's almost like it's been put in the news for some reason, and I'm not sure what, because the school, then it says the school wrote separately to the TRA saying it does not wish him to be barred from teaching. So they reported him to the TRA and then wrote a letter saying, but don't ban him. And apparently there's a hearing coming up and he might be barred from teaching for the rest of his career.
Well, that sounds like a storm in a teacup. What do we? Let's follow that closely, Martin, and see if anything happens.
See what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, if
watch this space. Watch this space.
Well, look, Martin, I think more interesting than that, you've been speaking to Professor Michael Young, who viewers might know of as the person who came up with the idea of powerful knowledge, which is making the rounds in school curricular decision making at the moment. What were you interviewing him about, Martin? What was the focus?
Well, the focus began with powerful knowledge and trying to unpick what the difference is between powerful knowledge, cultural capital, cultural literacy, and all those other terms that have sort of become a mishmash, the best that's been thought and said, all those things that are doing the rounds in curriculum discussions.
Yeah.
Which I've got a sort of suspicion that basically everyone uses those terms interchangeably to mean exactly the same thing. Wow. So I was trying to unpick, is it in fact the same thing that we're talking about all the way through? Anyway, have a listen to what he has to say.
It's not that I think that there's anything necessarily wrong with the knowledge that people in the public schools get access to. What is wrong is that it's actually access to only access to them. That's the key thing. The key thing is the question of access, not just a question of powerful knowledge. Just says there is some important knowledge. It's not the special privilege of some kids. It's the right of all kids. And somehow or other, we have to develop an education system that makes that possible. And subjects are the best way that schools can do, because they take kids away from their everyday knowledge and give them a chance to, in fact, have access to knowledge that is actually powerful. And what I mean by powerful there is I mean that it enables them to think beyond their experience and not just be trapped by it.
Right. So it's not posh knowledge, that's pretty clear, and subjects are important, but not really much. Does he shed more light in the full interview?
Yeah, we talked for about 45 minutes, so please go on. It'll be up very soon on the site, so subscribe and you'll get a notification. If you press the bell on the subscribe site, etc., you'll get a notification when that comes out, the full interview. But he talks about his differences between him and Hirsch, for example. He talks about decolonization. We talk about that as well. And yes, the truth and everyday knowledge. And of course, this perhaps is something that works particularly well for mathematics and the sciences. But when you get into the humanities and the arts, perhaps things become a bit more fuzzy about what to teach, why to teach that as opposed to that.
That sounds fascinating. I'm going to be looking forward to watching that myself. Maybe I should subscribe.
You should.
I should. And so should you. If you haven't, we're a bit cross.
Please subscribe. There you go.
Yeah, please.
Now, when are we going back to school, David? I'm getting fed up of staring at screens, says me staring at a screen.
Well, the 8th of March, apparently, Martin. That's the official line anyway, but there are some complications. And one of the headlines this week has been that teaching unions might be causing a bit of a problem.
Yeah, the teaching union is causing a problem, according to the Sun.
According to the Sun, and
there's a surprise.
Boys and girls.
It's quoting Kevin Courtney and Jeff Barton. They're talking about insisting that teachers are given new contracts to compensate if school days are lengthened or terms extended into the summer holidays, etc., etc., etc.
What do we think about school days being lengthened and summer holidays being shortened?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Kevin Collins, who we talked about last week,
the curriculum czar, something like that. I can't remember.
Czar, yes, catch up. I can imagine catch up czar. You keep running after him, but never get there. Anyway, the
ketchup czar, who just
ketchup czar
is all over
all over Heinz ketchup. No, anyway, extra hours of academic learning he thinks would be a good thing. But I think he must have been listening or watching our video, because he also said there should be a festival of fun. He didn't mention those words, mind you. Sport, music and drama should be part of it. And summer schools, he said, have promised. So perhaps these things are being mooted. But teachers are only contracted for 36 weeks a year. Isn't that right?
It is right. It is right. There was a good article by Laura McInerney, who we've interviewed in the past, writing in The Guardian today, saying that it is important that children need to catch up, that there will be some deficits as a result of all the education they've missed. But piling this responsibility onto schools is probably not the best way to deal with it. This is perhaps our collective responsibility as a society. And so that if we genuinely want children to have an enriched experience over the summer holidays, maybe we do a little bit more than just expect schools to lay something on. What do you think? Yeah,
so sports clubs, drama, students, actors,
work, couldn't they, Martin?
They could get to work, do some proper footballers. No, I mean, there are a lot of people out there. Actually, I mean, actors who still going back to the theatre looks like it's going to be some time. So if you're going to pay extra, it might be worth paying people. I mean, all these things about DBS forms, etc., of course, might stand in the way for some of them. But a lot of theatres run outreach classes and have education departments anyway who can do all this sort of work. Certainly, buildings, we have the school buildings there. I think it would be a grand idea. But of course, there is the problem that the virus is still out there.
Yes, it is.
It hasn't gone away.
It hasn't gone away, and apparently, amazingly, I think amazingly, we've managed to vaccinate apparently a quarter of the population already, which is astounding. And so the fact that we're getting to the point maybe where the majority of our most vulnerable people, citizens, will have had at least their first, if not their second, vaccination, might mean that it is a little bit safer to reopen schools.
Well, Professor Viner of UCL, that's University College London, Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health, said, "We predict it would be feasible to reopen schools from March the 8th and still keep the R rate under 1 if we don't reopen the rest of society at the same time." So that could be a bit of a problem with all my ideas about extra classes and things like that. I'm not sure, but it might be putting a kibosh on that in the shorter term.
Yeah, there's been also some interesting pieces about maybe the government overcorrecting on the mistakes maybe made last summer, where obviously pubs and restaurants were rapidly reopened. And I think rightly, there's been some criticism of some of those decisions, and obviously there's similar pressures to reopen all sorts of public-facing businesses as rapidly as is safe. But that's a really important point. What do we think is more important? Getting children back to schools, getting schools properly opened, or nipping down to the pub and being able to shop at John Lewis?
Oh, you are posh. But certainly,
You know me.
I was looking forward to Lidl myself. No,
well, you can go to Lidl already, Martin.
I can.
You've revealed something about yourself there.
I do wander up to Lidl every now and then.
Yeah, right.
Every little helps.
Absolutely.
But, can we get some money for that ad? Can we do that? No, but certainly talking about mental health is an important issue. I mean, there's these children are suffering. They're saying, and there are more calls to mental health services over this time. I think it's up by a third, people are saying. But also at the same time, we've got the other viewpoint, which is saying don't catastrophize. Okay, times are bad, but it doesn't mean that the stress you're having is a mental health issue. It is stress. Yes. Go on.
And it's pretty normal in the circumstances to be feeling
abnormal times make abnormal behavior. It doesn't mean the rest of your future is wiped out and you're forever going to be suffering because of this. So I think Matt Hood sort of got into a bit of a problem with some people.
Matt Hood, for those that don't remember, he was one of our earliest interviewees. He is the head teacher of Oak National Academy. Some people are unhappy with him having that title. It's not a proper school, apparently. But yeah, no, Matt was... what did he say, Martin?
Well, he was talking about early years education, and he's saying that it's going to take years and years and years for them to catch up. Perhaps they never will. The effects will last for years for this cohort. And, well, what can you say? I don't know. We don't know.
No, we don't. And it's obviously, I think the effects of this pandemic will be felt for years to come in all sorts of ways, which we can't yet predict. It would be odd were it not so. Whether that's going to be entirely negative is a different matter. But it does seem reasonable to think that the break and the disruption to children's education is bound to cause some consequences, but not everyone's happy at that.
No, but I'm interested in what you said there. There might be some unforeseen consequences that might be positive. People have talked about resilience over the last few years, the importance of resilience, etc., etc. And this generation aren't very resilient, or perhaps they are now.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think in years to come, we'll view this as our Blitz moment, won't we? We didn't all get together in the London Underground and sing songs because we had to be socially distant, but we all got round, Zoom calls and did the equivalent of singing songs. And
People were singing songs, weren't they? Do you remember all the celebrities were putting together songs and
yeah.
Captain Tom, God bless his heart, was singing, almost singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" as well, and things like that.
Much missed. So
I didn't hear
whether these things will may have a positive effect on people's development, it's impossible to predict. But I think it's absolutely the case that that children are feeling the pressure, whether they're young. I've got we are parents of teenagers, you and me, Martin, and just at the moment when young people are typically trying to branch out and get away from the family, they've been cooped up with us even more, and that young people going to universities, that's obviously been very, very disrupted as well. It's going to have all sorts of impact. And I think that the way that we remember this will in some way affect us.
Yeah. I think fraught relationships with parents is quite an interesting one. We spent the last few years saying, get off the screen, and now we're saying, get on the screen.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, isn't it?
What's happening on Wednesdays?
Well-being.
What's that?
Well-being Wednesday. Well, it alliterates, so that's nice. So I think a lot of schools have taken the decision to not provide live lessons on Wednesday afternoon in particular, I think, and instead encourage children to, toboggan or go for a run or, do something wholesome in the outdoors. But if my children are anything to go by, they're using the time to text friends and watch Netflix, and maybe even, if we're lucky, do a bit of homework. So I don't know.
Video games, perhaps.
Maybe all of that sort of thing. So it's a nice idea, and I don't want to be dismissive of it, but I think that it's unlikely to have much effect.
Yeah, and also they're not allowed out, are they, unless they're exercising formally. So and they can meet one friend or something like that as long as they jog together or whatever.
A brisk walk, Martin. If they
a brisk walk with the dog, perhaps. But it sounds a bit Enid Blyton, this sort of, or Just William or something like that. This halcyon days of kids going out and doing wholesome things when they're more likely to perhaps use the time on Wednesday afternoon to get dressed, perhaps, or have a fag. Well, no, they don't smoke these days, do they? They
might vape, might they?
Vape. I don't think they even do that, do they? I don't know. Mine don't, certainly. I shouldn't think yours
can't be bothered, can they? You people these days too apathetic to smoke. No, well, goodness knows. I mean, it's very, very difficult that they are in order to socialise, they have to do it on a screen, as you say, and so that what kind of effect this is going to be having on young people is impossible to predict.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's really important not to have too much academics when they go back, because I do think, a year or more for some has been lost in socialization. And that is a long time for someone who's lived on the planet for 11, 12, 13, 14 years or something, or less.
No, absolutely right. And I think that many young people will just be missing the conviviality and collegiality of being in school. And seeing their peers and their friends on a regular basis. So we can't underestimate how important just that normalizing experience is. And when students went back to school in September, there was a lot of worrying and hand-wringing about how they were going to cope. And I think the consensus for the vast majority of children is that they were just absolutely relieved to be back, and by and large got on with it, and were pretty resilient and robust.
And if they do open, I think they're going to open slowly on the 8th, with primaries going back, perhaps exam classes as well. They're going to keep a steady eye out on the numbers and whether they rise or not, and whether other things, all being equal, other things could perhaps open slowly and other years go back slowly afterwards or whatever. But extra classes, extra time, summer, etc., but that's all to be decided. But Kevin Collins is talking about getting these things decided quite quickly, so we'll keep an eye on that as well. Okay, what about going back to classrooms that are open plan?
Well, I'm sorry, Martin, just before we go back to classrooms that are open plan, let's just talk a little bit about the plans for year 11 and year 13 exams this year. So the consultation has closed. They had over 50,000 responses. Fascinatingly, about half of those were from students, which I think's interesting and maybe encouraging. So we're waiting for the government, for Ofqual, to release the results of that consultation. Obviously, we don't know. But I had a conversation this week with a official from an exam board. I won't say which one. And the conversation was, for me at any rate, really rather surprising. And one of the questions that I asked them was, what plans, seeing as mini assessments in some form seem to be likely, what plans they had made to putting together those assessments. And much to my surprise, I was told that unless they were forced to do so by the government, that there is no way that they will be releasing assessments with new novel content. What they will be instead doing is reusing content from past papers. So I was quite surprised by that. But that might be, if you're wondering, if you want an early steer on what you might want to do, if you're feeling that you might have to do a bit of planning over half term. I mean, my background's as an English teacher. Make sure they've read the bloody Porter's speech from Macbeth. That might be a top tip. But what do you think of that, Martin? Does that surprise you?
I'm just thinking now of the kids going back to school and stuck in front of looking at last year's exam paper, the year before, and not getting an education at all, but just trawling them through the exams is near to the
thought, isn't it?
Oh, it's depressing. That's depressing. Hey, inevitable, I suppose.
Right. Sorry, Martin, what were you talking about before? Something about...
Well, I was going to talk about you talking about this because it's kind of your thing. So open plans.
Yeah, we've got a little picture to put up of a school that recently, it opened its doors a few years ago with beautiful open plan spaces and all sorts of lovely things happening. But it didn't work as well as anybody would have wanted. So it was Lord Derby Academy and Prescott School. They have had classroom walls reinstated because the open plan spaces were not good enough. These schools, there were 7 new schools which were planned, and apparently to the tune of £157 million, based on a study. It'd be interesting to see this study, which said that children in the Knowsley area were kinesthetic learners, and that's something. Maybe we could get Tom Bennett to come on and tell us why that might be problematic. But whether or not kinesthetic learners exist, and whether or not we could make the claim that all children in Knowsley are children who are kinesthetic, it didn't work, and lots more money has had to be spent. Another 30 million, apparently, pounds spent on turning these futuristic spaces into more traditional looking schools.
Is this why offices are built on open plan, because they've got kinesthetic workers in there?
Well, that's obviously right, isn't it? That must be it. So, I saw this. This popped up on Twitter, and I responded to it. And I think that I've had experience of this. I've worked at a school which has gone through this sort of thing where they've gone big on open plan spaces. It didn't work. It was chaos, and lots of additional money had to be spent on fixing the building so that children could actually learn. And according to the Bournemouth Echo, Livingstone Academy is planned to be yet another of these very, very expensive experiments. An experiment which seems doomed to fail if all the other similar experiments are anything to go by. Be interesting to hear. Actually, are there any open plan schools that have been built in the UK which have succeeded, which everyone's happy with, which children are learning well in? Lovely to hear about some of those examples. But
it could almost be the Bournemouth Echo could be the sound that you hear around.
Yes,
an academy indeed. But I'm happy with that joke.
very good. Viewers, laugh later, if not now.
Mate, yeah. I was ready earlier, but you didn't give me a chance. But this happened in Bexley, near me in southeast London here. The Bexley Business Academy was designed by Lord Rogers of various buildings fame, and cost billions of pounds or millions of pounds or something like that, and was a complete failure. But also, I think there's some research into open plan offices being places where people get very stressed and find it difficult to work in anyway because of the competitive atmosphere. That person's working over there. You've got to be at your desk eating. You're always being looked at. You can never pick your nose, and all those sorts of things. Or if you do pick your nose, everyone can see you picking your nose. And people don't like these vast expanses to work in, So I think it's not just about schools. Should open plan be the way we continue? I think not.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, the fact that the £157 million in Knowsley was based on a study that identified the local children as kinesthetic learners. Surely, to goodness, we can do a little bit better than that. If we're thinking of spending £157 million on something, it seems to make sense to direct people towards more robust evidence. And if there is evidence on open plan schools or offices, let's have a look at it. Let's get it out there, and let's get architects reading it, because for architects, for all of their wealth of wisdom when it comes to putting up buildings, don't tend to know a lot about how children learn.
Yeah, and like you say, if it is kinesthetic, who's spending this money, and whose money is it? Is it ours, the taxpayers?
Well, certainly some PFI in that case.
And this is up-to-date news. This is the thing. I mean,
I know, it's astonishing, isn't it?
It sounds all very 1990s and
it sounds very building schools for the future, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds a bit like that. That's why I do a double take on those dates on that.
I know, right? Do you know, talking about building schools for the future, obviously upset lots of people when it was cancelled by everyone's favourite pantomime villain, Michael Gove. We haven't got a picture because I've only just thought of this. I saw a picture of him in the paper this week. White hair. What's happened to old Gove? He looks like been through the wars, so
could have been a snowball.
Could have been a snowball. It could have been a dye job. He might have gone for
dye job. That well-known Welsh. Sorry.
Steady. Yeah. So he looks like he's aged drastically over. Probably something to do with that Welshman he was working with.
Yes, I don't know this. Oh, and talking of which, and making up names, but this is not making up names. An article today saying the end of Gavin Williamson is nigh, and touting the idea that he might be replaced by Sajid Javid.
Wow. Who can say? Obviously, Sajid Javid resigns from Boris Johnson's government. Did he resign? What did he fall? Was he pushed?
He resigned.
There he is.
Hey,
Michael Gove. That's a little weekend treat for you. Something for the weekend. Yes, the thinking teacher.
All right.
Okay, that's quite enough, Samantha. Take him away.
We've got a Farage and Gove sandwich.
Beautiful image there, Michael. We're the meat in that sandwich.
Why do you call me Michael?
Who the hell knows? I'm off my game now. Anyway, look, stop it. Now, we haven't got. It's sad to say we haven't got a book to give away this week. So it just so happens I've got another copy of my book that I can give away to. I know it's nice. I'm nice like that. I've got another copy of my new book, Making Me.
It should be the person who makes the most interesting comment about today's episode underneath.
Yes, make an interesting comment
about the content of the show. Nothing wayward.
Or about what to do with Martin's hair.
Yes,
That's
it could be that.
Anything along those lines, leave a comment, and Martin will ask you to judge what you think was the most interesting,
and we'll announce it in next week's show.
That commenter will get a copy of the book.
Yeah, I'll get my mum to write a comment.
Yeah, and for those, a little bit of cross promotion. My book launch is on Monday, so at 6 o'clock. So if you'd like to come along to the book launch, it's just register for free at the address on the screen, and you can come along and join the fun. And it'd be lovely to see you.
And on that note,
on that sad note,
I knew I was going to cry.
Yeah, I know. Good job you've got the hanky. Thanks everyone for suffering through yet another waste of everyone's bloody time.
Don't forget, look out for the Michael Young interview.
Yes, and if you're crazy, subscribe.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time.